Just let me know once we do have some people on or once we're actually going live.
We're getting a trickle of folks coming in, so maybe we can wait a little bit.
Hi, good morning. If you're just joining, we are going to be recording the session today. So I hope that's okay with everyone. And we also are providing live Japanese translation by Yasue. So if that's something that you're interested or need, I think at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be an interpretation button, and you can select the Japanese room. I will start it. Should I just start it now, Yasue, you think? So the room opens up? Okay, so I'll start the room. And you should be able to join it if you need to. If not, no worries. You can stay on the main channel and it'll all be in English. We're just waiting for a few more people to hop in and then we'll get started. In the meantime, though, if you just joined us, can you please just put your name in the chat and maybe the business you're affiliated with or trying to start or whatever affiliation you're here for. Thank you.
Oh,
Hi, James. Thanks for joining. We're waiting for a few more people, then we're going to get started. And then when more people join, I'll start adding the links into the chat because I know that kind of doesn't really appear unless you're in the room. So, all right, I think we'll just get going just in the interest of time and people can trickle in. And then, like I said earlier, for those who missed it, we are recording this. So if we need to go back, if you need to go back and look at it, we can. But so I'll just start with some introductions, and then I will then hand it over to the our hosts who are going to present the information. So quickly, I'm Megan. I'm from LTSC. Thank you to everyone for joining today's Workplace Violence Prevention Plan workshop. It's a new law that was implemented, I think, late last September, something like that. And I'm sure Shamara and Annie will be more well versed on that. But this is a new requirement for all businesses as part of your Cal OSHA requirements. And I just want to quickly say that Yasue Katsuragi from LTSC will be providing in live Japanese translation. So if that is something that you prefer or would like, please select the interpretation option at the bottom of your screen and select the Japanese room, and she will be in there doing that. And I just guess I will pass it over to Xiomara and she can introduce herself and her team.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome everyone to our Workplace Violence Prevention webinar. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Along with myself is Annie Wong, who's my co-host and our program coordinator at the Pasadena City College SBDC. And if you're not familiar with our services, I actually would like to start by telling you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are a proud sponsor partner with the SBA, the Small Business Administration, with over 1,000 locations nationwide. And I do have a brief video I'd like to play for you that just kind of walks you through our services and what we can do for small businesses. So I hope you enjoyed the video.
At America's Small Business Development Center, our mission is simple: to help businesses grow and succeed. At the SBDC, we offer no-cost consulting and low-cost training to make it easier for businesses to start, grow, and recover. As a valued resource partner of the SBA, the SBDC serves small business owners throughout the U.S. by providing timely expertise and advice that business owners can use today. These services are especially helpful for small businesses impacted by COVID-19. There are 9 SBDC locations in LA and Ventura counties, and one right here in Pasadena at Pasadena City College, where we offer one-to-one consulting with experts in SBA disaster loans, strategic planning, marketing, financial analysis, and many more vital services. For no-cost help with your small business, contact the PCC SBDC at 626-585-3105, SBDC at pasadena.edu, or pccsbdc.org. We are here to help, no cost and no catch.
And that is who we are in a nutshell. As I mentioned, our team at the Pasadena City College SBDC does have over 20 advisors in any area of business administration that you can think of that you need support. So do feel free to reach out. I'd also like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a human resources consultant. I've been doing human resources for quite a long time now, over 17 years, actually almost 18 by now. And I'm also a small business owner of a boutique consulting firm called Solve It HR, and proud to be a resource to many businesses through the Small Business Development Center. So if you, after our webinar or even now, if you have anything that you need assistance with related to workplace compliance, human resources, managing your employees, do feel free to schedule a consultation by reaching out to our SBDC team at sbdc@pasadena.edu, and they will either pair you up with myself or one of our other advisors, depending on the type of assistance that you may need. The agenda for today, mainly we're going to focus on the workplace violence prevention law that went into effect last year. However, this is still pretty relevant because it applies even to small businesses, even with one employee. If you do have, if you do fall within the criteria within that scope of the law. So we're going to talk about how the law now defines workplace violence, the violence prevention plan and the requirements and your responsibilities as an employer. and what you can do to prevent it, and mostly also covering the training requirements that the plan has of employers. And we'll talk about other components of the law SB 553. And finally, we'll wrap it up for Q&A at the end. And but if you do have questions throughout the presentation, and do feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll be checking in either with Megan or Annie to answer those questions. I just won't want anyone to forget about their question as we're talking about the topic. A brief disclaimer that this webinar actually will be recorded. However, the slides are not going to be provided. So if you want to take notes or screenshot the slides, you feel free, you're more than welcome to do so. The information I do share today is up to date as of April 8th, as of April 8th, 2025. As many of you know, human resources is an ever-evolving discipline, and the information and the laws do change quite frequently, so it's important to stay up to date. What I will share is not intended as legal advice. Rather, I will be sharing it for informational purposes, so that you know what steps to take, to be in compliance with some of the items we'll be talking about. All right, and with that being said, let's dive right in.
Sorry, Xiomara, real quick. Just if it's okay, if you can speak just a tad bit slower so the interpretation can keep up.
Absolutely.
Sorry about
Okay.
that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so diving right in to Senate Bill 553, a brief background how this law came into effect, because many people are wondering, why do we have to implement a workplace violence prevention plan? How are we going to manage this? So what really happened, the background is that there were a couple workplace shootings, mostly around Northern California area, but there was just a shooting at a farm where someone shot 7 people and only one person survived, although he was shot 5 times. And that was in 2023. And in 2021, we actually did see another event similar to that one with the Valley Transportation Authority in San Jose. And we had 9 people that died in that incident. And so because of these incidents, the legislature sees a need for there to be a workplace violence prevention plan to protect employees, and something that Cal OSHA has adopted. As many of you know, Cal OSHA is the agency that ensures that employees are safe in the workplace and they are being provided proper working conditions, safe working conditions, to be able to conduct their jobs. So generally, a big overview of the requirements from Cal OSHA are that it requires that all employers implement an injury and illness prevention plan, and this has been the law since 1991. And this injury and illness prevention plan, or IIPP, as I like to call it for short, basically, as I mentioned, ensures that the employer is providing safe working conditions to their employees, that it's preventing accidents, incidents, fatalities, things of that nature. Also in 2020, we did see Cal OSHA expand the requirements in the face of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and they adopted something to protect employees called the COVID-19 Prevention Plan. And this was something that employers had to also implement during the pandemic to make sure they were protecting their employees from the COVID-19 virus. This is something that actually now has kind of gone away and has rolled up into the injury and illness prevention plan, but it's still a requirement that employers do need to protect their employees from COVID-19 and similar viruses. And now, as of last year, as of July 1st last year, we had the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan that went into effect. So let's talk about what those requirements and obligations are of every employer. So essentially, every employer, with a few exceptions, we'll talk about the exceptions to the plan, but every employer must establish a workplace violence prevention plan that communicates procedures to employees, provides training annually, maintains required documentation, and it's an evergreen document, meaning that you have to maintain it on a regular basis. It's ever evolving, right? So as new things come up, you're actually updating your plan to ensure those things don't occur. You're taking the proper steps to protect your employees from having to experience those things again. So a few exceptions to the plan are one for corrections and rehabilitation departments. So assuming that they comply already with an IIPP, right? They're already protecting their employees. Also, the healthcare industry is mostly exempted from the plan because years back, way before we had this law go into effect, there was one that went into effect to protect workers in the healthcare industry. So they already are covered by a workplace violence prevention plan that's specific to the healthcare industry. Also, employers that, in law enforcement, right? So law enforcement agencies are exempted from having this plan, for obvious reasons. Employees that telecommute from a location of the employee's choice and not under the control of the employer, right? So someone that's, working remotely, maybe from their own home, maybe they're at a cafe, somewhere where you're not requiring the employee to actually physically report to you. And employers with less than 10 employees that don't have access or contact with the public and already have an injury and illness prevention plan. So that's really the key is, for all these entities that are exempt, that they need to have already in place the injury and illness prevention plan that already protects their employees from workplace hazards. So one thing that SB 553 did is that it provided a definition of workplace violence. And it defines it as any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in a place of employment, including the threat or use of physical force against an employee that results or is likely to result in injury, psychological trauma or stress, and an incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or other dangerous weapons. So, so the definition is quite broad, quite general, because it's not only about physical violence, but it can also be stress and psychological trauma. So that really expands, to what can qualify as workplace violence, right? It could be someone that may feel threatened about a stranger that comes on site. It can cause them stress. It's pretty broad. The law also did provide 4 different categories of violence. It provided type 1 violence, which means that workplace violence is committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site and includes violent acts by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. So this is just generally someone from the public, right? Someone that has no business being at the work site, and their intention is to commit a crime. Type 2 violence is workplace violence directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, or visitors. So pretty much who the employee is going to be interacting with as far as your client base. Type 3 violence is violence against an employee by a president or a former employee, a supervisor, or a manager. So, this is more of like, with violence within your workforce, within your employee population. And type 4 violence is violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship with an employee. So, this is why it's important for employers to also have a policy for visitors, right? So this could be potentially like, your employee's boyfriend or girlfriend, they're a family member, that comes on site, to, just kind of hang out or wait for them. So as I mentioned, it's good to have a policy where you address visitors and the parameters around that. Megan, any questions? Did we see any questions come up about any of them?
Not yet. Nothing in the chat. Are there any
Okay, and are we good with the tempo?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay.
believe so. Yeah, haven't heard
Okay,
anything.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right, so now that we have the definition and the different categories defined by the law, let's talk about what the actual plan should look like. What components does it cover, right? So it does have quite a few components. It breaks it down to the actual plan, and then responding to incidents, and then providing actual training to the employee population. So for the plan requirements, we're going to see that in the plan, you must include the individual who is responsible for managing the plan. So this could be, someone you assign as the point person, your manager. If you don't have any supervisors or leadership, then it could potentially be you as the business owner, but the plan needs to be administered by someone at the work site. You also need to have effective procedures for obtaining employees and authorized representatives' active involvement in developing and implementing the plan, right? So not only do you need to create, was there a question?
Don't think so.
Okay, so not only do you need to create the plan, but the plan, as I mentioned, it needs to be an evergreen document that you maintain on an ongoing basis, right? So it needs to be updated at least, I would say, yearly, or as incidents come up, right? So if something has come up in the workplace that wasn't addressed in your workplace violence plan, you want to make sure you are updating the plan and the steps, procedures that employees can take to prevent that situation from ever occurring again. And you do have to get employee participation for the plan. So you have to, you can't like just build the plan by yourself. You have to engage the employees as to, what they foresee that could be potentially workplace violence hazard, how, because they're the ones that are doing the jobs, right? They could be, they can see more things than that potentially a manager or a supervisor. They are doing the jobs on a daily basis, and they know what type of hazards they face as well. It also needs to include the method the employer will use to coordinate and implement the plan with other employers when this is applicable. So a perfect example of this would be, for example, in the construction industry, right? So you have the general contractor, and then you have a subcontractor, right? So two different companies, two different businesses that come together to work on a project. So each one needs to have a workplace violence prevention plan, assuming that they fall within the requirements. But also you, as the employer, you need to coordinate with the other business to make sure that all the employees understand what the plan is, what the procedures are. And I would say, obviously all the different criteria and requirements are important, but why the main reason why the law passed, as I talked about those shootings that took place in Northern California, was because the employees did not know how to evacuate the premises, right? They had a gunman, they saw the gunman, but they didn't have any idea how to evacuate and what to do in that situation. So making sure that if you're doing business with another entity, another company, you're coming together to do business, that your employees understand what the evacuation procedures are for both, your business, your employee, and then the other companies, or at the specific to the work site. They need to know what the evacuation plan is. You also need to have effective procedures for the employee to accept and respond to reports of workplace violence, and ensure that employees comply with a plan consistent with, with safe and healthy work practices. Last, you also need to communicate with the employees regarding the workplace plan. Again, you need to let them know how they can report an incident, how the concerns will be investigated, and how the employees will be informed of the investigation results. So, this is part of the plan being like an evergreen document that you're maintaining. You've got to maintain that communication with the employees on a regular basis for them to know how they can help maintain a safe work environment. Also, a few other procedures that the plan needs to include. It needs to include, responding procedures for actual or potential workplace violence emergencies. It also needs to include the, how to develop and provide the training required by the law, which we'll cover in a few minutes, and to identify and evaluate workplace violence hazards. Again, including periodic inspections that you want to have in place to make sure that, one, the plan is being effective, because that's also key. It needs to be effective. We just can't be implemented and it has no effect, right? If incidents keep occurring, then the plan is not effective, and hence why it needs to be reviewed on a consistent basis. And last, it needs to, the employer needs to be able to correct any identified workplace hazards, post-incident response and investigation, how you're gonna, again, conduct those if something does come up, and review and revise the plan on a as needed basis. Now, as far as for the training requirements, so that's the plan itself, right? So, main things, you've got to have the employees participate and help you develop the plan, and you got to have a consistent review of the plan through inspections, feedback from your employees, and ensuring that everybody is up to date on the new plan requirements and how to report incidents. Now, the training requirements, you want to basically base your training off of the plan, right? So first, you're going to build a plan, and the training requirements, you have to train the employees on the plan itself, right? So this is one area that many employers or companies and businesses like to outsource and get a training company to provide a training online. And there are plenty of those out there that will say, hey, we have a workplace violence prevention training. Here it is. You can have your employees complete it. However, that actually is not going to satisfy the requirement under the law, because under the law, they want the document to be ever evolving, because it needs to be specific to the workplace, to your industry, to your work site. It needs to include all those potential hazards that are just specific to your business, right? So all these trainings that are out there online probably are pretty general and don't cover those potential hazards. So, be careful if you do want to outsource the training, make sure that it's going to be something customized to your specific business to meet the requirements. But essentially the training topics, right? So It needs to cover the plan itself, how to obtain a copy of the plan for the employees at no cost, how to participate in developing and implementing the plan, right? So, this could be, for example, you leave a suggestion box for them to provide their feedback on how they want to contribute to the plan, or they foresee preventing workplace violence. Maybe it is through like a group chat. I know there's many apps out there, Slack. There are other apps that you can engage your employees in and providing feedback. So, that's an active area that you need to maintain on a consistent basis. The training also needs to include the definitions that we covered. So the definition of workplace violence, also the different violence categories, how they're going to report an incident, and that you're not going to retaliate against them, right? So this is becomes a protected category when they do report an incident. You can, as an employer, you cannot retaliate against your workers. It also has to have a hazard specific to the employee's job and corrective measures that the employer will implement, and how to seek assistance to prevent or respond to violence, right? So again, this is part of an ongoing effort. The opportunity for interactive questions, right? So it needs to be interactive training. Again, it's not to say that it has to be like a live person there, but I know it needs to provide the opportunity for them to ask questions and for that person to answer those questions live as they're being asked. And the employer must provide additional training when a new employee starts. So not only do you have to do the training on an annual basis, but also when you have a new hire, making sure you're bringing them up to speed on what the workplace violence plan is and all the training requirements. And also every time that a new unrecognized workplace violence hazard occurs in the workplace. So that, that's also a trigger for additional training to your workforce. So just to recap, right? So the training requirements is once a year, every single year, you need to provide this training upon hiring someone. So every time you have a new hire, when a new workplace violence hazard occurs, and the training does need to be provided in a language that is understood by your employees, right? So, the plan wouldn't be effective if you're training your workforce in a language that they are not going to understand what to do. Should there be, hope knocking on wood, but should there be a workplace violence prevention plan, right? The vocabulary used in the training also needs to be according to their level of education, right? So if you have, some employee population that maybe didn't go to college, maybe they dropped out of high school, let's say, you need to make sure that the vocabulary used in the training is common language that they are going to understand. So mainly the plan is for people to understand and know what to do in case of an incident, in case of, hopefully never occurs, but in case of a shooting, in case they need to evacuate the premises. Everyone needs to make sure that they understand that those procedures, they know what to do. All right, so now that we know the plan, and now we know we got to train the employees on the plan, and everything needs to be customized, let's talk about how to manage and respond to workplace violence, because the law actually does provide criteria and conditions to actually respond to workplace violence incidents and for the employees to report. So basically, as indicated in the workplace violence prevention plan, the employees can make a report of any incidents or concerns they may have, and you need to provide a method for them to be able to do so. This could be, for example, like if you have a hotline. This could be, for example, like it could be like a form, like a Google form, that they can submit online and say, hey, these are my concerns, about my job or about working here. So they can include several different methods, but you need to make sure the employees do know what the method is. You can also have someone that's the point of contact for employees to report those concerns, right? So if you have a supervisor that's going to be overseeing the plan, then everybody can come up to the supervisor and report that incident or concern to them, right? And an option is always the local police department for them to be able to report those incidents. But ideally, you want to be able to manage these incidents in-house before they escalate to that level. And so, we already kind of covered this, the active involvement of the employees. So again, some options could be like you have a safety committee that meets on a regular basis to talk about how to keep the workplace safe and how to prevent any violence incidents. The suggestion box, right? So a workplace violence response unit, you kind of have other people engaged and involved in being able to manage and respond to the incidents. Additionally, could be like regular staff meetings if you do have those. And I know the IIPP does require communication and training on several different topics on an ongoing basis. So if you're already covering some of those topics, then you could include the workplace violence prevention incidents, any new things you have to cover to make sure that's a way for you to comply with that requirement. We already talked about coordinating the plan with other employers. And some things that, examples of things that employers can implement, right, to maintain a safe work environment can be a panic button, right? So you have someone at a front desk, for example, there could be a panic button that's included like on the bottom of the desk somewhere, should there be like, a situation that requires them to resort to that. You can have surveillance cameras as well, limiting access to unexpected visitors and restricting access to doorways. So I know a lot of times, and I see this in bigger buildings, but a lot of times people have their badge where they scan it, and that's the only way someone can actually have access to the building or to the area. If there's a security guard on site, that's also another way that employers can use to comply with this requirement. And providing training for anti-bullying type of training and de-escalation of violence or aggression strategies. That is also something that employers can implement as corrective measures and to comply with that requirement. So now actually, let me check in with Megan or Annie to see if we have any questions that have come up in the chat.
Don't see anything in the chat right now. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so now to preventing and responding to workplace violence, right? So as I mentioned, this has to be something that's on a consistent basis. So either through your inspections, you're going to spot potential hazards, or through your through your meetings with the employees, that they're going to be providing that feedback and meeting on a regular basis. And the workplace violence incidents that do occur, they actually do need to be logged. The employer does need to keep a log with incident date and location, a brief description of the incident and the violence type, right? So we talked about the 4 different types. You're going to rate it as type 1, 2, 3, or 4. Who committed the violence and the circumstances. So not to disclose actual names. You want to maintain this confidentiality of the person. So who committed the act of violence, maybe it's just a general description, so an employee in such department, or an employee, you can just not identify the person by their name. Where the incident occurred, and again, whether the violence was a physical attack, a threat of force, or an attack with weapon, right? So the different type of violence. Ways to ensure that you respond to the workplace violence is to maintain your workplace safe, is to ensure that all your managers and supervisors are trained and that they understand the anti-retaliation component of the law, right? So you cannot retaliate against an employee who comes forward and reports a concern or an incident of violence, right? So again, define and explain those retaliation methods, and ensure that your policies in your employee handbook also reflect anti-retaliation measures and potential consequences for retaliating, right? If say, for instance, a supervisor retaliates against an employee because they reported something, you need to be able to have consequences to that behavior. So the best way to ensure that you are preventing that is to make sure that you are providing this consistent training on a regular basis, right? And again, how to report the incident and the investigation that you will be conducting to make sure that, one, you understand what occurred, and then 2, you can prevent that situation from occurring, and 3, that you're updating your workplace violence, implementing new procedures to ensure that situation doesn't occur again. So a few things on the violence incident log. Cal OSHA does have a template, and actually there is a template for many of these requirements. So, not to feel like you have to, not to feel overwhelmed, like you have to come up with like this plan just, out of thin air, out of nowhere, right? Cal OSHA does have some templates that they already provide to make sure that employers are in compliance. However, they do need to be customized to your workplace, right? So Cal OSHA doesn't like to see the actual template when they come on site, and for example, they do an audit and ask you, like, where's your workplace violence prevention plan, where's your IIPP. They provide the template to just kind of give like a general idea of how the procedures and the measures that need to be implemented, but the employer, the business, the company still needs to customize it to their actual site, right? So making sure you take that template and you include all the potential hazards in your specific workplace. That would be what would show that you're in compliance. But they do also have a log for workplace violence incidents that needs to be maintained. So again, it needs to provide that classification of violence. It needs to provide the date, time, location, brief description, and the type of incident, and any actions that the employer is taking to prevent those incidents from occurring again. There are some record retention requirements by the law that every employer needs to maintain. So, for example, training records need to be kept for at least 1 year. The violent incident log needs to be kept for 5 years. Any records of workplace violence hazard identification and evaluation, that's also 5 years. And the investigations, any incident investigations, that's also going to be 5 years that you're going to need to keep those documents. Ideally on site, if you're able to keep them like on your computer, saved somewhere, like in a hard drive, just saved like in your shared drive somewhere in a log, that's that's great as well. And these incidents also need to be made available to employees upon request, right? So Cal OSHA can come on site and request these documents, as well as your employees, and they need to be provided to them free of cost and on a reasonable and on a timely basis. So in brief summary about the requirements of the law, so number one, right, so you need to conduct an assessment of your workplace violence hazards, your site, get your employees' involvement in developing and implementing your workplace violence plan, and also conduct the training and make sure that the plan is being reviewed on a consistent basis, that it is being maintained, and your employees know how to report incidents, and those are being investigated. You're keeping all your documents, your log, and conducting your annual training on a regular basis. So that's essentially, in summary, what the requirements are. So wanted to provide that brief overview. Also, Cal OSHA does have a fact sheet that talks about the different requirements and the obligations from the employers to comply with the plan. So I've shared a link with a link from Cal OSHA that actually does have all these documents, and any employer can access them. So these documents are free. I know a lot of companies out there are selling these documents. They are actually free, but they are just templates, right? So they still need to be worked on. They still need to be customized. If you're going to buy the document from someone else, essentially what you should be paying for is for their time customizing the plan to your specific business to make sure you are in compliance. But just know that this is a resource that already exists. So there's a template for the plan, and there's a template for the log, and there's additional information on there that you can use to provide your employees, or use to discuss with your employees on your regular meetings as you cover other topics from the IIPP. All right, and with that being said, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Are there any? I know it's a lot of information, a lot to take in. So if you don't have any questions at the moment, feel free to let us know in the chat later on, or by email later on if you want. But does anyone have any pressing questions right now? No, I think we're okay. Okay, I think we're good, Xiomara.
Okay, great. Well, if anyone does have any questions, I know that's a lot to take in, but if any questions do come up, feel free to reach out to us at our email, sbdc@pasadena.edu. You can also follow us for more topics relevant to your small business. We do have a host of other webinars. And you can find those on our Instagram it's at Pasadena SBDC. So give us a follow there, and we just like to keep everybody informed of anything that goes on in the small business world. And last, we do have a newsletter that businesses can sign up for. We don't do email blasts. We won't email you every day. We email once a month our newsletter, and that has a lot of great information. For example, like things such as grants, any updates, like for example, this new law. We had updates about the BOI requirements. All things relevant to small businesses. So I encourage you to sign up for a newsletter there too. So that you can, have that information at the reach of your fingers. So it's been a pleasure to be here, and we're here to answer any questions and help. So thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. I do have some of the translated materials in Japanese, so I will send that out again, as well as some of this other information. We will also be sending it. And we did record, so if you guys would like to see the recording after everything, for those who may have joined late, please let us know. And then lastly, I believe we will be sending out a short evaluation, which really helps us, helps our program, and it kind of helps us fulfill some of our requirements for our program. So I will be sending that out via email, and if you could respond to that, that'd be great. But yeah, if there's no other questions, thank you so much, Shamara and Annie, for presenting this information. Really appreciate it. But I believe that's it.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, bye.